Welcome to the Storyfield. This is a podcast created and sponsored by the Allen Firm. This is Josh Allen, and I'm joined by Micah Petrie. I think you'll agree that life is complex, business is hard, and living a life of faith can feel complicated. We know it's discouraging when movement in your life or business or faith has stopped. Well, you're in the right place to hear some great stories of normal people just like us who will inspire you to move forward in life. So thank you for joining us. Today, we know you're going to be encouraged. Well, we have an absolutely incredible guest on the Storyfield today. So Les McKeown, thank you so much for just blessing us and making time for a conversation. I'm just grateful that you're here.
It's great to be here with you, Josh. Hi, everybody.
So I'm going to try to give a little bit of background facts on your lesson. And, it's not going to do 100% justice, but you're the founder and CEO of Predictable Success. And they're an organizational growth and leadership development firm. And some of your clients are T-Mobile, American Express, the U.S. Army, Harvard, Chevron, and more. So you have some quite the client list there. You're a best-selling author of 4 books: Predictable Success, The Synergist, Do Lead, Do Scale. And Liz, where can they find just those books? Just, I'm going to take a pause for a second. Amazon, everywhere.
Everything's on the website, predictablesuccess.com, and it's all one word, predictablesuccess.com. And the books are all, as they say, available anywhere great books are sold. So they're all on Amazon, Goodreads, Books A Million, wherever your favorite 1-800-CEO read, wherever your favorite source is.
Good deal. And then you've also appeared, Les, on ABC, CNN, BBC, and in Inc., USA Today, New York Times, and now in small town Texas. So I'm glad to get to add that to your list. So have you, I want to, pause for a second. Have you ever had some Texas barbecue? I need to make sure to put you on the ground here.
You see, now you're going to get me in trouble because I went down to Alabama one time, and as we might get into, you gather from my accent, I'm not from these parts.
Yeah.
And I said some passing thing about barbecue, and before I knew it, there were entire families fighting over what was and what was not barbecue. So I'm going to say no, just because if I say yes, then you'll ask me something and I'll get some nuance wrong, because I know it's important to you.
Yeah, it is. It's a big deal.
Yeah, let's just so you know that where Josh lives up in North Texas and I live by Austin, they fight just between there on what is good barbecue within the state.
See?
Yeah.
Now, you asked me about fish and chips.
Yeah.
That I can talk about.
Okay, good deal. Well, we're also in the cowboy capital of the world. Stephenville. So, and that's the self-proclaimed, and it's true. But have you been to many rodeos? That's one day I want to get a feel for your Texas flavor.
You are really, you're teasing me into getting into big trouble. I have not been to a rodeo. No, I have not, but I have been called a cowboy many times.
Okay. Good enough. Well, so you're an international, well-known, renowned keynote speaker. Have you spoken to groups like Google? Fortune 500 companies. As far as education, and I love this, Les, that you finished number 1 in the entire country of Ireland on your, CPA equivalent exam. And you did so really without an official degree, which is just incredible. We'll get into that. And then by the time you were 35 years old, you had formed and started, 42 companies. We're going to get into that as well. You were also a co-founding partner of an incubation consulting company, launched hundreds of businesses and thousands of employees. It looked like at your peak, you had 13 offices in 7 different countries. Is that right?
I did.
Wow.
It's why I look as old as I do. But,
yeah.
Of course, I am old in real terms as well. But and it feels like a long time ago. But it was a great founding, as we'll get into. It was a great basis for everything.
That's great. Well, so kind of lastly, you can tune in to Les. He has a podcast called Scale with Predictable Success. Where you've had the former president of Starbucks, Daniel Pink, which I love as an author. He's the former presidential advisor, New York Times bestseller, and recently a dean of the London School of Business. So that's great, Les. I truly believe that your model and your methods surrounding it have been some of the most valuable and practical information I really have ever learned related to business. It's just that chewable and that practical. So if you are a business owner from startup to a mega long-term company, I mean, you're gonna greatly benefit from this interview. So thank you. I'm honored, and let's get into it. So I wanted to talk a little bit first about just Ireland. I mean, so as you know, we are in two different, you know, raised in two different parts of the world. But can you talk to us just about what was it growing up? What was it like growing up? Give us a little bit of your childhood. Just kind of talk us up. Help us learn about Ireland and all that.
Well, the first thing to say is that there are two different perceptions of Ireland. There's one which is somewhat a slightly romantic perception, all leprechauns and everything's green and everybody's dancing jigs and drinking a lot. Oh no, wait a minute, that bit's actually true.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is sort of, I'm going to be very general here, sort of based really around Southern Ireland. It's the southern part, which is a separate country. That's the whole basis of the problems that we've had out there is that the island of Ireland is actually two countries on one landmass. So Southern Ireland, that's the pretty part, and the lasses are all down there, and that's where all the ginger hair folks are, all that sort of stuff. And then I grew up in the north of Ireland, Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom, not a part of the country of Ireland, despite being on the island of Ireland. And so they've been fighting about that forever. And I grew up during what we called the Troubles, which is a fun way of giving a sort of a deflective name to what was essentially a civil war. And it was 30 years, which happened to match my first 30 years of life, when the long simmering tensions between the North, which is still is primarily Protestant British, were being challenged by not the country, not the South, but the Catholic Irish Republicans. And so there was a terrorist organization called the IRA, and it was waging civil war in the North. So it was pretty bleak. It was a country under civil war. There were helicopters in the air all the time. There were soldiers in the street all the time. There were curfews. There was no public transport after 10 p.m. There were car bombs. At least once a week there'd be a car bomb in the city. You get frisked and searched, rather like the TSA lanes and airports. Going into any store was like that in Belfast, where I grew up. You got frisked every time you went in there. And I was a kid through most of it, and then I grew into adulthood, and it was just what I grew up with. I didn't really think about it as being abnormal, which is weird, but that's what it was like. And thankfully, we had a peace process. Which really began to flower the year I left and came here to the US, and now that's all simmered down quite considerably.
Do you have a chance to get back there much? I mean,
well, not obviously. Most recently with COVID and the travel restrictions, I haven't got back within the last 12 months, sadly. But I have an 8-year-old grandson back there, and one of my daughters is still there. My two other children are elsewhere. So I go back from time to time, not that frequently.
Yeah. Well, I know this was, obviously is a topic close to your family and home, but I wanted to ask you, I've kind of ran across information about your sister actually having been killed in the Troubles in the Civil War. And I know that's close to home. Can you tell me just about that, if you're comfortable with it, and like your mother's involvement to really help solve it, which is incredible to me.
Sure, I'm happy to. I talk about it actually a little bit as you related. I don't talk about it much, but I mention it at towards the end of my book, Do Lead, because as I'll share in a moment or two, my mother did exhibit a remarkable and for me highly surprising act of leadership. We all think of our parents as doofuses growing up, and then suddenly this remarkable thing happened. But the circumstance surrounding my sister was just, it was one of those wrong time, wrong place deals. We were going through a stage in the Troubles where there was a series of what we term tit for tat killings. So essentially one side of the conflict would kill somebody one night, and the next night the other side would go out and find somebody. And My sister was active in a local church activity, which sort of obviously designated her as being part of that group, that side. And she was just unfortunate enough to be the last one locking up the church actually after the event that she was at. It was late one September night, exactly 40 years ago, actually, this year. And somebody stepped up behind her. Someone from the other side had been shot the night before. Someone stepped up behind her, put a gun to her neck and shot her. And she was in a coma for 3 weeks, massive head trauma, back trauma, and eventually died 3 weeks later. And it was obviously just a dreadful event, and it sparked something. At the time, there were over 3,000 people came to her funeral. There was a massive outcry because she was entirely innocent. She wasn't active in anything to do with the Civil War, the Troubles. And, my parents obviously were utterly shattered. It must be one of the hardest things in the world, I think, to have one of your children die before you do, and obviously so brutally as well. And I noticed that my mom was disappearing for large periods of time, and I got worried about her. And I tried to find out what was going on, and she wouldn't talk to me about it. She wouldn't talk to anybody about it. And it took me 2 years before she would start to share what she was doing. And what had happened was just about a few weeks after Karen died, she decided she would find a way to go meet with the paramilitary leader of the other side's group. Wow. And she made inquiries and just kept asking until someone told her to go to a certain place and wait. And she went to a place she didn't know, stood on a street corner, literally. And we had a thing called black taxis. You've seen these black London cabs. Well, they were used a lot by the paramilitary organizations back then. And a black taxi drove up, and she was escorted into the back. She was blindfolded. She was driven around for a couple of hours to disorient her, and then she was taken up a series of back stairs and found herself sitting with a guy called Jerry Adams. Jerry Adams is now a wholly accepted political leader. Back then, he was known to be the head of the paramilitary wing of the IRA, which is the Republican terrorist organization. So my mom sat and talked with Jerry Adams and wanted to know why her daughter, who was completely innocent of anything, was being targeted in this way. They cut a very, very long story short. They sparked up a relationship. Jerry Adams told my mom that she was the first person he had ever met physically from the other side, so to speak. He never met someone from the other side before. And she started to meet with him from time to time. And eventually she sparked a connection that led to Jerry Adams meeting with a guy called Ian Paisley, who at that point was the leading voice on the other side. And they had never met, never talked. And that led eventually to the what's called the Good Friday Agreement, which was the peace agreement. Now, there were many, many, many steps in between and many other people involved. And my mother was not, by that stage, involved with all of that. But what she also then did was she went to and I know I'm going on at this, but I'll finish with this point. She started to visit people who had been imprisoned for acts of murder from the other side of the divide. And she started going around churches. She met a guy called Chuck Colson who had started Prison Fellowship. Yeah. And under his sort of, I guess, mentorage, she started to go around with one of the guys who'd been released from prison, and he had been charged with murder. And my mom and this guy, Liam McCluskey, would get up and speak in front of churches and talk about reconciliation. And my mother never told me, my dad, anybody that she was doing this for years afterwards. So she was a remarkable woman.
What an incredible legacy. Oh my goodness.
She had no education. She no nothing. She just got jobs from, whatever she could hold on. We were a very, very working class family, and she did just a remarkable thing.
Wow.
That's
Thank you for sharing that. That's
yeah,
incredible.
yeah.
Just absolutely incredible. So get us caught up to your early professional life, and then getting to the point where you formed all the companies, and then about how you created the model, the predictable success model. So kind of walk us through that story.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned at the head of the call, I was initially slated to go to St Andrews University in Scotland, a beautiful university. But to be absolutely blunt, my family couldn't afford it. So it turned out my eldest daughter, was the first person in our family ever to go to college.
Hmm.
I couldn't afford it, but what I could do was I was able to take up the opportunity of the very last year when you were able to enroll for a course of study that would lead to a chartered accounting degree, which is a CPA. It's the exact same. It's the UK equivalent of a CPA. The year after I joined, I took that option away. You had to have a college degree after that.
Hmm.
But I could sign on and do 4 years, essentially night school. So I would work during the day for an accounting firm and study at night. And the reason I did it was I was sort of fascinated by business. I was a weird kid. Offices and things that went on at work fascinated me. And I wanted to work out how business worked for some reason. I have no idea where that came from. And my first ever mentor, a wonderful gentleman called Jim Johnson, told me either become a CPA, an accountant, or a lawyer, an attorney. And here we are. You chose
Yeah,
that.
you bet.
I chose the other route. And it was great advice. So I did it, and I qualified, and I qualified quite well. Got quite well known fairly early on. And I started to. There was a huge push towards entrepreneurship at that point in the UK. We were essentially a branch economy of the US and South Korea. So if LG or Daewoo or Ford caught a cold, we would lose 15,000 jobs in Manchester or Leeds or something like that. So the UK government was pouring huge amounts of money into trying to get local startups going, because we didn't have much of an entrepreneurship background. In fact, entrepreneurship was seen as a pretty sticky, icky sort of a thing. Times have changed a lot. But anyway, when I qualified and put up my shingle, there were a lot of people trying to take advantage of this and start businesses. So I started to help them and advise them, and then people would. I got quite a good reputation for that. I would, take people to the bank, get their bank loans, find them a partner if they needed one. If they didn't have actually an idea, I'd help them incubate what an idea would be. And eventually people started to ask me if I would be interested in, going beyond just advising them and joining them in, on the board or as an interim CEO or something like that. And I had this remarkable opportunity for 8 or 9 years to just cherry pick 6 or 8 opportunities each year. It was about as many as I could cope with. And I did that. And so by the time I was 35, through that process, I had, mostly with other people, I did a couple on my own, but mostly with other people, I had helped launch 42 businesses. And even a dumb Irishman is going to start seeing some patterns when you do something that often. And I started seeing these recurring patterns of what you needed to do to actually succeed. 2 of those 42 businesses failed. I was still in Northern Ireland at the time, very small community. They were publicly embarrassing, but I learned a lot. And I learned an awful lot from the similar patterns in the others as well. And the second phase then was when, again, the UK government, God bless them, asked myself and a fellow serial entrepreneur, that we didn't have that phrase back then. We were just called crazy. A guy called Will McKeown, no longer with us, sadly, if we would put together a program to help train other people to launch businesses. They really wanted to scale this thing up. These days it would be called an incubator. We didn't have those words. For some reason, they were called science parks back then. I don't know why, but anyway.
Wow.
We founded the first one in the UK, no model for this at all. We found a book by a fantastically named guy called Carl Vespa, who I think was working in a university in Massachusetts on entrepreneurship, and we stole some stuff from there and basically codified whatever we thought we knew, and we grew that business, and it was an out of the park success. I mean, the first year we really knocked it out of the park, and so we were bringing people in, 30 people at a time, twice a week for 6 months. So Monday and Wednesday night, we would have these people in, because they all had jobs, and we'd teach them how to launch a business. We'd take them through, and then we'd have this thing like Shark Tank at the end, where we would bring funders in to see if we could get them some funding.
Oh wow.
It was
What was your age range in this? Like when did they approach you?
They were actually, it's skewed older than it would be now, because this was way pre-tech. This was the internet didn't exist, Josh. That's, listeners, this is how old
Yeah.
I am. So probably mid 30s to early 50s.
Yeah.
And anyway, Will and I were there one night, and we saw this group of people all in suits sitting in the back, and found out later this was another economic development agency from another country, who were basically going to rip off what we were doing, because we were so successful. We thought we better get there ahead of them. So we started flying around the world, and as you say, we ended up with about 120 people in 13 offices in 7 countries worldwide. And it was a remarkable time. But the whole time, what I was doing was building my understanding of this model. So the patterns that I'd seen at the early stage, now I was tracking them at second stage growth, third stage growth. And finally, I moved over here in the US in 1998. Because one of the reasons was, there were a number of reasons I came here, but one of the main ones was I felt sure I saw a complete soup to nuts, startup to death life cycle for organizations, and I needed to test it out with very large companies and not-for-profits. And that's when I started working with many of those organizations that you mentioned at the start, T-Mobile, Microsoft, US Army. And the model proved itself out, and I started giving it a name, called it Predictable Success, a 7-stage growth model. And from about 2006 onwards, that's all I've done. I just teach that model and help other people grow their organizations. And it's been a great privilege.
So basically you had 10, 15, 20 years of the predictable success model. You just kind of came here to kind of prove the theory. And if I was like in a scientific type form.
Yeah, I try to make clear to folks, Micah, that the model isn't academic. It's, no interns were used or harmed in the making of the model. Yeah. It's entirely observational. So it's what I saw actually happen, and the businesses that I was starting and the ones that I was advising and helping with. And all I did was put vocabulary around it. I mean, the hardest part of developing the model, apart from spending 30 years getting the raw material, was just coming up with the precise phrases and terms, some of which we might get into, that would instantly convey the stage that you're at any point in this life cycle. So I was just slapping terminology and making connections between things that if you were in business for any period of time, you would know them, but maybe you didn't quite see the connections before. So that's really what I was doing.
Yeah. And I want to dive into that, because that's the naming them and giving those terminologies has made it so helpful just for me and us to be able to communicate. Otherwise, it's just too hard to grasp. So for all who are listening, I mean, it's a life cycle curve, and the stages are early struggle, and we'll get into these. So early struggle start, then a stage called fun, then whitewater, and at the very top of the arc is predictable success. On the other side is treadmill, the big rut, and the death rattle. So there's so much in this for everybody, but can you start us in early struggle, Les, and just speak to the people who are starting and into that, and let's just walk up kind of through the arch all the way, if you would, and just kind of give us some lessons here.
Happy to do it, and you get extra brownie points for being able to go the whole way through the 7 stages.
Well, I have my cheat sheet, so I've read this enough to know.
Yeah, me and Josh have spent like 6 months going through this, kind of figuring out like, we're still in the whitewater. Yeah, we're still in the whitewater.
because Les, I came crying to you when I was in Whitewater, so we're gonna spend some time in that. So you've been gracious to like encourage me through that I wasn't on the death side of it. So
And we've just, I think, proven the number one benefit, and it doesn't have to be my model, but the number one benefit of any model is shared vocabulary. It's so important when because we in business we talk a lot about things that folks take for granted that we all mean the same thing. But I mean, the word leadership is a good example. What the heck we've all got different notions? But anyway, to your point, the model, as you say, we start down at the bottom of the arc. We've got a period, I call it early struggle, because that's what it is, essentially the startup phase. And it's a struggle for a profitable, sustainable market. Actually, whether you're a not-for-profit or not, it doesn't matter whether you're trying to grow your church or your charity, you're still trying to find, whether or not you find the phrase pleasant, a profitable, sustainable market. You still got to be able to pay the bills, and you've got to be able to grow your membership if you're a church. But if you're, manufacturing ballpoint pens, it's very clear you need a profitable, sustainable market. Big mortality rate, about 80% of all new ventures across the board fail in the first 3 years. So only a small percentage make it out of early struggle and into the second stage, which I give it, as you've mentioned, the highly technical name of fun. And that's because it is. It's just fun, I know who I'm serving now. I'm not desperately worried about finance every single day. Yes, we have our moments, but at least I know where to go to get business. And we were very flexible. The way we manage and lead the business and fun is we just say yes to everything and work it out later. Nothing is a no. We pretend that we've got a rate sheet and a product card, but basically whatever you want me to do, I will do it, and I'll work out a way to do it. And we grow because we're flexible, and the clients and customers like it that way. And again, if it's a church, we're highly evangelical, and we're exuberant.
So I'm gonna stop for a second, Les. So when do you switch between, as a business, like when do you switch between early struggle and now I've made it to fun? Like how do you know I made it past that?
Whenever you've got a line of sight in your future cash flow, that might sound very mechanistic, but it's not because of the cash flow, it's because of what the cash flow represents. So if you're in a service business, if your cash flow projections consistently show a surplus, even if it's only a marginal surplus, for 3 months out, so you're reducing your cash flows. And one of the things I teach people is when you're in early fund, the only document you need to know and understand is how to read a basic, very simple cash flow. And you've got to do it every week, and you've got to stare it down, and you put no projected income in there. You don't invent anything. You look at the real actual booked income and your actual expenses. And when you get to the point when you're consistently looking at that week in, week out, you've always got, if you're in service, a 3-month projected surplus. If you're in a manufacturing business, it's got to be closer to 6 to 7 months rolling out, because you're not as bigger. And the reality is, if you're a not-for-profit, it's the same thing. You've got to be able to project a surplus. You're not looking for profit, but you're looking for a surplus for at least 3 to 6 months. And when you're at the point where you're producing that cash flow all the time, and you're not, angstfully wondering how to pay the bills, after that, it's going to go into you produce a cash flow, it's going to go into the red at some point. But if you're constantly running that 3 to 6 months, then you're in fun at that point.
Okay. So when I'm going to back you to the early struggle one more time. If a person walks into my office and says, I have a great idea, I'm ready to start this business. Hey, I want y'all to form it. Let's get going. Like, what are you advising that person? Like, what specific questions are you asking to help them know, like, are you going to be successful or not? Like, are you going to get out of this early struggle? I mean, how are you going to peel back the layers there?
Well, actually, you're asking a different question there,
Okay.
Josh.
Okay.
I need to bring something else in here. As you'll be aware, and for the listeners, I need to just take a minute and put this in context so I can answer your question. As well as the 7 stages of growth, one of the important parts of the only other primary part of the predictable success model are 4 leadership styles that emerge in the organization over time. And the very first one is what I call the visionary leadership style. And that's typically the mindset that's 30,000 foot, big picture, wants to do great things, gets a little irritated with detail, risk taker, and that's almost always the mindset of the founder. So that
Okay.
person who's coming in is typically a visionary leader. The other three are an operator who just gets stuff done, just goes through these block walls, makes things happen. A processor who brings systems and processes in place. And then ultimately at the predictable success stage of growth, we have a fourth style called a synergist who needs to be there to help the processor, operator, and visionary work well together. However, to go back to your question then, the person coming through the door needs to be a visionary in mindset.
Mm-hmm.
There are ways to help those people from the other styles succeed if they want to find something up, but that involves getting them a vision.
Mm-hmm.
And the blunt answer is this. I've done this for over 30 years. If anybody ever comes in, whether it's into my office or sends me a WhatsApp message or whatever,
Yeah.
and their question is, should I do this? The answer is no.
Mm.
It's always the case. Anybody asks you, should I launch this? The answer is no. Because the only time you should launch a new venture, 80% failure rate, 80%. So I'm not going to try to convince you that you can beat those odds. That's a big, the house always wins on that bet.
Mm-hmm.
The people succeed are the people who have got to the point where they're no longer going to ask. If you're still asking, don't do it. When you get to the point where you don't need to ask, I'm doing this. Because if you're going to start trying to launch something, 8 out of 10 people you ask are going to say, no, you're crazy. So why ask? So that's my answer is, if you're asking, the answer is no.
Okay, that's good. That's real
I'm
good.
not trying to be smart, but I don't want to lie about what my advice is to
No, that's helpful. So the visionary comes in, early struggle, they find their market, the cash flow, they have some sustainable cash flow and they have a market. So we hit fund, and fund is like,
and we think we've arrived at that. For all of us starting something, there are only 2 stages of growth. You think about it, it's how we view things, and rightly so. Why wouldn't we? You ask anybody as they're thinking about starting something, this, oh, it's going to be a rocky period of time. I get that. I know it's not going to be easy, but I'm going to keep at it and we'll make it. So that's it. There's only 2 stages of growth, rocky, and then I'll make it.
Yeah.
Early struggle and fun, right?
Yeah.
And so you get to fun and you think, this is it. We did it. We did it.
Yeah.
We did it. And now it's just more of this. Fun, fun, fun. This year, fun. Next year, fun squared. After that, fun to the power 3. And for a while it's like that, and we grow fast, typically in fun, because we're saying yes to everything and pleasing people.
And we're just making it happen. I know you've said in your books and just some stuff I've heard from you, like there's no real meetings, there's no real like fun is just, there's no real structure.
Sure, a meeting's right up in the elevator,
Yeah.
Get into the elevator. Hey, you know what? I think we should open an office in Chicago. Really? Why? Oh, I met a guy last night. You love him. He's great. Really gets us. So, that's how you should run the business in fun. And typically it's a visionary or visionary founder, and he or she will have a group of what I call operators. So these are hard charging individuals who just operate really well under instructions. And the way we run the business is we come in and we conduct this little tiny orchestra of operators. Say, oh, you go out and sell. I think he'll buy from us. You go sell to him. That's to the salesperson. And okay, you get out and install that one to the installer operator, and you make sure you collect our outstanding invoices. That's to the admin operator, and it's the visionary conducting a series of operators. But what's happening the whole time is quietly behind the scenes, barely noticeable. Every day we're just getting a little more complex, more people, more clients, more products, more services. And there comes a point at which that complexity, without us being conscious of it, it's sort of like milk curdling in the fridge. There's never a moment when it just curdled, right? Yesterday it was fine. Today it's off. And what happens is we slip into this stage I call whitewater. So that's the point at which we have it takes about a year to work out we're in there. But once we've worked out we're in there, it's a big decision to be made. And it's this. Do I go back to fun? In other words, slow up a little bit here. We're growing so fast that we're getting growing pains, essentially. We start to screw up. We start to make mistakes. The complexity begins to catch us out. We sign a contract and haven't read all the clauses, and we're stuck with some terrible lease, or we don't turn up for an important customer meeting, or, we just send something out and it's not right, whatever our industry, and it's going to be different, but we just start to mess up because complexity is starting to kill us. We can't just come in and say yes and innovate or improvise. I'm sorry. We've got to start, if we want to continue to grow, to put some systems and processes in place. We've got to start codifying things. We've got to start saying, this is how we do this. We've also got to start saying no to some stuff. We can't just say yes to everything because it's killing us. At this point, we've got to say, well, what is our core business? Let's just narrow down our offering and pare back a little bit. But that is like, for our visionary and operator, it drives them crazy. They just want to keep saying yes to everything and scratching their itch and, making it happen. And so there's a binary choice happens in Whitewater, which is, okay, I really liked it back there in Fun. I'm going back there. And at that point, if you decide that, what you're deciding is something that's perfectly valid and good, which is, I just want to be a boutique operator. I just want to have a niche business. Right? I personally, there's just me, and listeners can't see my assistant who's asleep at the moment on the couch beside me, and has no opposable thumbs and will need walked and fed a little later. Blue knows I'm talking about him. I'm in Fun. I've made the decision that, I've built businesses into predictable success. It's wonderful. It's great. At the moment, this stage in my life, I don't want to be McKinsey. I don't want to be Bain and Company. So I've gone back to Fun so I can help advise other people. But if you want to scale, if you want to continue to grow, you've got to start putting those systems and processes in place. And weirdly enough, as you've probably discovered, once you've made that commitment, the actual systems and processes are not in themselves the problem. The problem is the behavioral change that's needed to go along with those systems and processes, to stick to them, to use them, to implement them properly. And that's where I do most of my work, is helping coach people through the behavioral shifts necessary. But if you get those necessary, the good news is, to get those changes made, good news is you now reach the apex of the life cycle stage I call predictable success. And the key distinction between predictable success and Fun is that in Fun, there's always a cap on your growth, right? There's only so big a number that I can chalk up in my world without cloning me or duplicating me. I'm in Fun. There's always going to be a cap in my growth. I can make each year better, a little bigger and so forth, but I'm not going to get a J curve. I'm not going to, accelerate the growth of my business in Fun. If you want to really scale your business, you've got to be in predictable success, because that gives you the platform of repeatable systems and processes to do that.
And that's the big difference, right? I mean, I read Do Scale, and it was great. Can you explain to us what it means to have a scalable entity, which is the top of that growth curve, versus, being in Fun and being a non-scalable entity? Because that's the two main differences from what I gather.
Yeah. So when you're in Fun, you can have years when you put in good growth. You can have some double-digit years. Last year, ridiculously, with all of the COVID stuff going on, I had the best year of my career, and I put in a very substantial growth. But there's still a cap. There's only so many hours in the day I can work. There's only so much that I can put out there. And when you're in Fun, that's the case. And so your growth curve is like, going up the side of a gently rounded hill, and you're going to plateau, and then you find a few ways to innovate, and you maybe push it up a little bit more, but you're polishing the apple. Nothing wrong with that. You think about it, just thinking of a real world client example of mine. So this is a couple in in a town that I used to live in Massachusetts called Marblehead, a little sailing village. And this couple owned a coffee shop in this little town, and they opened, they're greatly successful. They got through early struggle. They opened a second one, which is great. And they opened a third one, and it grew as well. But after that, the service level started to go down, because there's only two of them and the three locations. So there was always one location they weren't at. So they could keep tweaking at that, but if they really wanted to scale, they wanted to become the local version of Caribou Coffee, let alone Starbucks. They wanted to get to 6, 8, 10, 15 locations. They're going to have to learn about hiring managers, buying in bulk, mass refrigeration, repeatable recipes, so that they didn't need to be there personally. If they'd put all of that in place, they chose not to. They could have easily scaled. Their concept was very scalable, but they decided not to. They wanted to go back to fun. So now they're back to just 2 locations, because there can always be one of them there. Now, what can they do with those 2 locations? They can keep pushing, the average take from each customer up a little bit. They can extend their hours a little bit. They can maybe do some online stuff, but there's always going to be a cap. So that's the essential difference.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, let's spend a little time for a minute on Whitewater, because that's where I think most people that I'm around are in, and I think that's really where I came to you. And and I will give listeners a plug for your program, your book, The Predictable Success, and the program. It's just so helpful. But I thought we were kind of in like it feels like you're on the sinking ship side in Whitewater.
Right.
But tell us, what are some key indicators? You mentioned them on, like, you're in Whitewater, and then what are some steps people can do? Pretty clear steps that, process and systems I know, but bring it down a little bit more for us, to get to
So
the predictable success.
you put your finger on a key point there, Josh, which is, if you remember when we were talking about fun, I was saying, for most people who start a business, there are really only 2 stages that they anticipate. And right, oh, well, why wouldn't you? It's sort of, okay, I'm going to have a rocky while, but we're going to make it. So it's 2 stages, rocky period, and then we'll make it. So whenever you hit Whitewater and you start, this complexity hits, the way it shows up is, the reason I call it Whitewater is it's like as if we were just coasting down the river before, having some fun, and then before you know it, the weather has changed, and now the whole thing's starting to rock. It's like a bad movie. If what you thought was there are only 2 stages, there's only one thing that could be happening here, which is we're dying. Right. So we had the rocky stage, and then we had it good. But most people, when they hit Whitewater, most founder owners, they don't think this is Whitewater. They certainly don't think, oh, this means we're just 1 stage from being at predictable success. They think, my baby's dying. This is dying. And it shows up in different ways. Often the founder owner will be looking around and thinking, did we get stupid recently? Because it's what it feels like. It feels like we're just doing stupid things. We're having to constantly remediate stuff that we cause ourselves. We're fixing problems that are our own, it's our own fault for doing. So it's very confusing. One of my clients years ago said it felt like he was wearing 2 pairs of kitchen mittens on either hand. He couldn't feel the business. He couldn't make things happen. When he put his foot in the accelerator, so to speak, the car wouldn't go forward anymore. It's sort of like you feel helpless. So for that reason, there's typically Whitewater on average, I'm generalizing hugely here, on average, it's a 3-year process, sadly. And one of the reasons for that is that the first year is sort of in a stage of confusion or denial. Initially, what's natural is that you blame people, even if you're not. I don't mean that as any value judgment. It's just something's going on. You think, Michael, why did you deliver all of that stuff to the wrong construction site? That was for Smith, not for Jones. So you blame Michael.
Oh, and he will, because I'm the visionary. So I don't even remember what the addresses were when I got done putting them in the box.
Yeah.
So we blame people. And then it takes a while to realize, after you blame Michael and Joanna and Henry and Priya, no, this can't be right. We didn't all get done. There's something systemic here. It's something that's not people related. And so the second year tends to be dabbling with that and saying, oh, okay, let's get ourselves in, wherever you're making the mistakes, you bring somebody in who will help us sort that out. Let's bring in a quality controller or a route planner or a warehouse manager or, in-house legal, an IT person. Wherever our problems are, we hire 1 or 2 people. And that's the crucible at which that decision gets made at a visceral level as to whether you want to go back or go forward, because bringing that first, remember the styles, first processor in at a senior level, it causes massive internal conflict. We were used historically to just saying, yes, Madam Client, of course I'll do that for you. I don't know how, but we'll do it somehow. And then making it all up. And now somebody's producing spreadsheets, making us fill in proprietary software, attend meetings, writing memos, suggesting we have Slack. And that's when the behavioral response rises to the top. And that's the crucible. The crucible is going to be the 4 inches between the ears of the founder as to whether or not they want to make this shift or not. So that's year 2. And year 3, if they decide, is making the shift, whether it's back to fun or on to predictable success. The key distinction is that moving back to fun is not complicated. It just means unwinding what we just did and going back to where we were. Moving through that final stage into predictable success, the key problem is you're going to drop some people off the bus. You cannot, unless you're incredibly fortunate, and I, in my whole experience, I've never worked with an organization that's moved through Whitewater from fun into predictable success who haven't lost some key people who were part of their success in making that transition. And the reason is quite simply that there are people who are built to be in fun. That's so important to them that they can't make the transition. They can't switch. They can't begin to work with systems and processes. In fact, it makes their brain hurt so badly that even though you might have built a lot of sweat equity with them, even though they may well have been, superstars in the fun era, at some point, if you're serious about making that transition, there's a very difficult parting of the ways. And it's usually with what I call a big dog operator. This will be somebody, one of our operators, goes through brick walls to get things done, and did so much in the early stages of the organization's growth that they built a lot of sweat equity internally. They had a lot of authority, a lot of autonomy. And it's heartbreaking. That's the hardest thing for any leader, is to eventually get to the point where they're looking at somebody in the eyes that may be godfather to their children, been to their house, been to their kids' sports events, and mutually agreeing, I get it, boss, you want to go this route, I can't do it. I just can't do it. And that's in all that I do, that's the toughest thing that I find myself helping people through.
So to kind of bring in the visionary operator type thing, is there like a correlation between what stage you're in, because you're heavy on one side and not balanced by bringing in the other people? I know synergist doesn't usually come in till predictable success to kind of help everybody talk to each other. But like if you're low in and you're full of X, does that kind of help mess you up?
Yeah, it's a very insightful question, Mike. The ideal choreography, if you think it like dancers, coming on and doing steps together, and then we move to the next part of the dance, the choreography that's ideal is visionary, is in employment, doing their due, but just gripped by the need to launch this business, goes, finds one or more operators early on. And that visionary operator, you remember the conducting the orchestra, the visionary, that's what pushes you out of early struggle and into fun. And that's what grows the whole organization through fun. Then ideally, when you wait till you hit Whitewater, then you bring in the processors that you need. We go through a rocky period of trying to get, that's when the synergist emerges. And unlike the others, the best way for the synergist role to emerge is actually not for it to be another person, but for the visionary operator and processor to learn how to be synergists. The synergist style is a learnable style, unlike the others. If you're not a visionary, nobody can teach you to be a visionary. If you're not an operator, nobody can teach you to have that ruthless, get it done mindset. If you're not a processor, you put me in a room as long as you want and feed me as much software, I will not become a processor, right? but anybody can learn to become a synergist. So the best way is that towards the back end of Whitewater, the visionary operator processor team learns to how to synergize themselves so they can move into being a visionary synergist, operator synergist, processor synergist. So to come to your question, Micah, the more that's distorted, then the more you're going to do damage to the potential of growth. And I'll give you a really, really common example. So many tech businesses launch with a visionary, an operator, and a processor. There's the visionary who's the one that says, yeah, sure, we can sell, plastic pizza to people or whatever down the internet. There's an operator who in the team who's saying, yeah, I know just the people to sell it to. I'll go start running this. And because it's tech, there's a gearhead, there's a nerd, there's somebody who's going to make the software that'll make all this happen. And that distorts the existence of the processor at senior leadership level way too early on, distorts the growth of many, many, many startup businesses. And yet, because it's tech, people think, I don't know how we would do this without, a solid processor in the team. So having too much process or early on, that distends your growth. It slows it down. A lot of people who have read my books or heard me speak will often, come up to me after an event or whatever it might be and say, hey, I get it. I'm in fun. I absolutely get it. So should I start planning now to make sure I don't go through Whitewater? In other words, should I get processors in so we don't start messing up? So that's the last thing you want to do. That's the last thing, because you'll just flatten your growth way too early. No, I'm not speaking ill of processors. I'm a processor actually myself, as you might imagine, having done my CPA stuff. You need each of those. They're all equally important, but they need to be there. They need to come on board at the right time. And as a visionary before launch, operators come in immediately afterwards, and then processors whenever you hit Whitewater. And then once the three are together, develop the synergist style as a team.
And so, Les, where can they? We have a few more minutes. I want to ask, like, where can they take the quiz? I know we've taken it. Where's a good place to locate that if somebody's listening saying, "What am I?"
So there are two quizzes. To find out what your styles are, go to synergistquiz.com. That's all one word, synergistquiz.com. And you'll get it take about 7 or 8 minutes, and you'll get a full detailed sort of DNA printout. I'm talking as if we're all one thing. We're not. Most of us have got a primary style and a secondary style. So I'm primary V, secondary P, big visionary, small processor. Mm-hmm. And some people have got 3 active styles. There are a few people, but some of them are active on all 4 styles. So go to synergistquiz.com. You can work out what you are there. You get a nice little report at the end of it all. And if you want to work out where you are on the life cycle, you can go, surprise, surprise, to lifecyclequiz.com.
Okay.
And that'll take you through the steps of working out where you are on the 7 stages of growth.
Okay. Well, real quick. So talk to me about at the very top in the predictable success, the top of the life cycle, you've really stressed the importance of high quality team-based decisions. And that's a big deal. I mean, just kind of coming where we came from, but like there used to be in fun, I think not much team-based decisions. And now you're trying to really strive for making high quality. Can you speak into that for a minute?
Yeah, it was one of the aspects of the model that only became clear and obvious to me quite late on, because it's deep into behaviors. And what I realized was whenever I sat with teams that were in predictable success for a prolonged period of time, I mean, you can get to Whitewater, do some things and edge up into predictable success, and then find yourself falling back down. It's like a gravitational pull pulling you back in there. And I worked with those teams that were deep into predictable success, sustainably so. I spent about 10 years just trying to work out what if I could distill this down to one thing, what's keeping them there? And once I did discover it, it was as clear as day, and it's proved itself out over and over and over again. The key distinction is these teams, because they're in any organization, predictable success, there are multiple teams, you might imagine. They can make high quality team-based decisions. Now, in the old days, that meant sitting in a room. These days, we're making decisions synchronously, in a room virtually over Zoom. We're making increasingly our decisions asynchronously. So I send you like a Loom video or some information, and it gets posted to a group, and they share comments on a Google Doc. But whatever way you're doing it, these are teams making decisions. And that's the single biggest, what I discovered, that's the single biggest organizational shift out of fun. If you were to play the video, remember the days when you used to be able to play videos at 4 times speed, and they'd get everything get all jerky, or one of those videos of the clouds in the sky scudding across at 100 times speed. If you were to play the video of an organization's growth from early fun up to predictable success, the number one thing you'd see changing is how we make decisions. In fun, some information comes in, and that information, by the way, back in fun, sometimes it's just anecdote. It's a story. And the reason that works is that in fun, when the business is relatively simple, anecdote is a proxy for data. You hear something from one of your customers when there's only 3, you only got 3 customers, or there's only 3 of you, it's almost certainly true. Anecdote is a good proxy for data. Anyway, either an anecdote or data comes in, and a person makes a decision and makes it happen. They might tell somebody in passing, they might have to reach for one tiny piece of information, but by and large, 80% of all decisions in fun, you can make unilaterally. And it's just a question of directing them. You make those decisions, I'll make these decisions, you make those decisions. Then you get into complexity. And what complexity causes is the need for us to communicate together as teams. Any complex, if you work in any organization, more than 10 people, I challenge you to recall the last decision you were able to make entirely on your own. It was probably whether or not to go and top up your coffee right now or not. That's probably it. And so nobody tells us that we've got to develop that need. It's sort of like when somebody hands you your first kid. Oh, right. What do I do now? Well, these days there's a lot of books you can go to. Nobody says to you, you've got to learn the ability to make team-based decisions. And there is a skill to that. We don't have time to go into it all. But essentially, that's what high-quality team-based thinking is all about. It's about being able to get in a room virtually and hammer out team-based decisions over and over again. And my final word on this, well, unless you have another question on it, but a final point to make is this. One of the things that happens to a decision, the concept of a decision as we get more complex, is when we're simple, small, in fun, a decision is a decision is a decision. And that includes making the decision and executing on it. The two are inexplicably wrapped up. It's like I say, you get in an elevator, you talk about opening an office in Chicago by 8 a.m. By 1 p.m. you've phoned a couple of realtors and you're looking at offices. It's making the decision and executing on it are inextricably linked. The biggest single thing that we're fighting over and over again as we get more complex is the drifting apart of making the decision and executing the decision. And so we end up getting in these teams and making the same decision over and over and over again because we're not executing on it. And when I talk about high quality team-based decision making, I include executing in that. It's about making and executing.
That's good. Well, let's land the plane, Les, so take us on the other side, just finalize the last 3 life cycle of past predictable success. On the slope side is treadmill, the big rut, and death rattle.
Sure.
Give us your cliff notes on that.
So real quickly, once we get into predictable success, up until now, the life cycle has been very much like a human life cycle. You think about it, early struggle, babyhood, fun, you're just a kid, enjoying yourself. Whitewater sort of a little bit like adolescence, growing pains, all that sort of stuff. And in predictable success, we begin to see where an organizational life cycle is different. In theory, if we keep doing the right thing, and in practice, if we keep doing the right things, you can stay in predictable success indefinitely. Unlike physical aging, which we haven't learned how to stop yet, you just keep on going. In organizational growth, if you do the right things, you can stay there for prolonged periods of time. There are many organizations that have been in predictable success for prolonged periods of time. But for most organizations, we do what is not comes naturally to all of us. Something happened over years that was painful for us. That's introducing systems and processes. That was tough. But look what it delivered, excuse me. Look what came as a result. We've got this wonderful, we're predictable success. Now we're scaling. So if systems and processes are good, what should we do? We should have more of them. And what happens in most organizations is we begin to overemphasize systems and processes, and the P role begins to dominate. Being a processor becomes a core need to succeed in the organization. Doesn't matter what your functional skill is, you got to become a good processor to play the system. We start to talk a lot about compliance. There's an awful lot of checklists going on. There's an awful lot of, what we might call CYA, covering your behind. It starts to become more important to fill in the checklist than what the checklist is there to have happen. We get more concerned about, are you using the exact Pantone color for our brochures than it says in our style guide, as opposed to our brochures, jaw dropping. People come on our website, they've got to fill in 17 fields in an online form just to get an initial free consult, right? So we just get, and that's the treadmill stage. In treadmill, we're just over processed. And then binary decision right then, just like treadmill is like a symbiotic twin of whitewater. Whitewater, first time we're under processed, treadmill's first time we're over processed. And there's a binary decision in whitewater. In treadmill. In treadmill, the visionary will put their hand up at some point and say, this is ridiculous. We've got to ease up on these systems and processes. If they get heard, we ease up on systems and processes, like taking our foot off the brake pedal, we come back in predictable success. And that can happen over and over again in most organizations. And it's a natural tendency, but as long as you correct it, it's fine. If you don't correct it, what will happen is eventually the visionary will leave. This is often the point at which a visionary founder owner sells, promotes themselves to chairman emeritus, gives management over to another group, just gets out of the way, or just leaves entirely. And once that happens, we're on the road to falling into what I call the big rut. And the big rut is where the processors are totally in control. All of the vision has gone. Eventually, the operators will leave because the operators need the visionary to give their marching orders. And so it's just processors like me making sure that the business goes bust precisely on time. That stage can last literally for decades, because don't forget, we've been in predictable success. We've made a lot of money. We can make a lot of money in treadmill. Warren Buffett, all of the businesses he invests in are in treadmill. You think about them, railroads, so on and so forth. You make a lot of money in those businesses. So here we are in the big rut. Personally, I think Microsoft's been in the big rut for about 7 years now. Harvard University, client of mine, been in the big rut for over 100 years. But it's got $33 billion in near cash. It's not going away anytime soon, but it's on a long, slow slide to irrelevancy. And that's what the big rut is, long, slow slide to irrelevancy. And then eventually, at some point, it all just runs out and we hit the final stage, which I call death rattle. You see a bunch of action. Like a few years ago, you might have seen a bunch of stuff happened around a company called Kodak. Kodak was absolutely in predictable success for decades. They owned imaging, they owned film, and then they just blew it with the internet age. And then suddenly the name Kodak came up, but they were in death rattle. It was basically people selling off the patents.
That's when you get the liquidators and receivers and all that. And it's over.
It looks like something's happening, but all we're doing is putting this sucker to bed.
Les, that has been so helpful. I'm just grateful for you walking us through that. And where can people find you and then look at the online course, because which we've been through? Could tell us a little bit about that, and then we're going to let you go. Thank you.
Sure. So as I mentioned on predictablesuccess.com, there's a link there to our online learning center, which is where all the online courses are. And that's obviously, been a massive increase in the use of those in the last year as we've pushed everything online. But the course that you're referring to is our Predictable Success Online Acceleration Program. And it's essentially a series of self-paced online courses, online modules that take you the whole way through the model, helps you just work out where you are, figure out where you are on the life cycle, build an actual action plan to get where you want to go to, whether it's back to fun or up into predictable success. And there's an enhanced version which comes along with some coaching with me, which you and I work together on. So that's all there, predictablesuccess.com, and then just click the resources button and go to the online learning center.
Okay. Well, we're going to link it up and probably put the life cycle on there as well. So you have blessed us tremendously. Thank you for your wisdom, and what a fascinating story, Les. So thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Hey, this is Micah. Me and Josh would like to thank you for joining us in the Storyfield today. We hope you've enjoyed our discussion, and to learn more about us and the Storyfield, visit thestoryfield.com. This podcast is sponsored by the Allen Firm, legal guides for many of life's situations. To learn more about the Allen Firm, visit allenlawfirm.com. Have a blessed day, week, and year, and we will see you next time on the Storyfield.
This is Josh again. I just wanted to thank you for listening and let you know that this podcast is really about hope and about giving you hope for your life. So if you're listening and you're in a place where you're really feeling hopeless right now, or if you do not know Jesus, we have some great news to share with you and would love a chance to pray for you. Email us at hope@allenlawfirm.com. That's hope@allenlawfirm.com, and we'll reach out to you soon. Thank you for listening. God bless you.